Let's kick off our session. So, the state of audio measurement and how to buy like a pro. Audio continues to grow, but questions around measurement and buying remain. This session will look at how marketers can approach audio more effectively and drive more measurable outcomes. So please join me in welcoming Head of Partnerships from Podscribe, Matt Drengler.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the session, the state of audio measurement and how to buy like a pro. As she mentioned, I am Matt Drengler, Head of Partnerships here at Podscribe. I'm here to talk to you today about some specific tactical things that drive better performance within audio, and to make sure we all sort of understand why I'm sort of qualified to be on this stage to talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about Podscribe, who we are. So Podscribe today is measuring the ad effectiveness for over half of audio's top advertisers. Our roots are truly in podcasts. We also are in streaming audio significantly. We just introduced a brand new radio attribution tool as well, and many of our clients are starting to ask things like, can we also measure CTV, display, and video? I think perhaps surprising to some, maybe not surprising to all, but most of audio can be measured just like digital. And today, that's what Podscribe brings to the marketplace, as we talk about the ability to have real-time dashboards, plus reporting fed through an API, user-level attribution, always-on incrementality, and a whole slew of other things. With this work, oftentimes across all of these brands and logos that you're seeing at the bottom, they look at their reporting and they ask the question, is this any good? I'm happy to say we can answer that question. So on a quarterly basis, what we're doing today is we are spending time to aggregate all of the data together and to find true insights on what is working within the audio space. And for those of you that want to see our latest and greatest benchmark report, so this is our Q1, we lovingly call this the PPB, or the Podscribe Performance Benchmark Report. The next one's coming out in about a month, I would say, but latest version right here on that QR code. And what I'm going to do is dive in on some very specific insights. So first insight to call out here, streaming audio in podcasts. Those are global benchmarks that you're seeing. A couple of things to call out. On the left-hand side, what you're seeing here are response rates. So things like install rate, visitor rate, conversion rate. These are literally defined as how many attributed installs divided by impressions, how many attributed purchases divided by impressions, so on and so forth. And we see a fairly obvious difference in the performance between podcasts and streaming audio. So if I look at, let's say, visitor rate, streaming audio appears to work about a third as well when compared to podcasts. From a conversion rate perspective, very similar story. But on the right-hand side of that, you start to see where these metrics start to equalize a little bit, because only looking at response rates sort of misses one of the biggest aspects, which is how much did you spend on this campaign. So the sort of fourth from the left, attributed conversion rate. That is literally saying, of the people that these channels drove to the website, how many of them made a purchase? So we're about 1 in 20 for both of those channels. When you look at cost per visitor, streaming audio with a lower response rate driving a more efficient cost per visitor, but only slightly. They're pretty close, pretty equal. And when you look at cost per acquired customer, kind of the same story. So these are some of the things that we like to identify. The invisible hand has done a great job at pricing these channels fairly accordingly, and you're seeing that from an efficiencies perspective, these channels perform well together. So there is general, overall, global benchmarks. There's a lot more to look at in here though. And I find one of the first things that allows us to introduce the audio space as more of a digital channel is to kind of give a couple of quick stats on what's going on. Let's start with podcasts. So in the podcast space today, global ad spend is around $5 billion. In the US, just announced or just released by the IAB and PwC, we're about $3 billion in the States, about $2 billion internationally. To give you an understanding of like what the size of the channel is, so about 600 million people listened to a podcast in the last week. 73 or 3/4 of the US adult population have said that they have listened or watched to a podcast. Keyword watched. I'm not sure how many of us are paying attention to podcasts lately, but they're being dropped in audio and video left and right, so a very important stat. About half of the weekly podcast listeners have confessed that they actually made a purchase because of a podcast ad, and it's just the people that were willing to admit it. And so based off of a lot of those stats, what we're starting to see in the space is that the ad load is going up. We're seeing a lot more entrants in the space. And I think what's really important to call out here is we probably just hit about the 10% ad load mark, probably in the last year. Just making sure we all understand, when I say ad load, you have a 100-minute podcast. 10 minutes is an ad, 10% ad load. We compare that to something like TV. It's like 19 minutes out of an hour. There's a lot of opportunity here still within podcasts, and something that we see still as being under-monetized. And one of the main reasons why is many people still don't know that this can be measured just like digital. So with that knowledge, let's talk about some very specific insights. Host-read ads versus producer-read ads. A host-read ad is the cream of the crop. That's what everybody thinks about when they want to start advertising in podcasts. They're like, I want Jason Bateman in SmartList to talk about my brand. That is the number one thing that people think. And that does a great job at driving conversions. Now, if you were to take that host-read ad and let's say target it on all downloads of SmartList. So yes, the newest ones and the back catalog downloads, just a fancy term for downloading older episodes and listening. What we see is the purchase rate for those host-read ads are better than the producer-read ads, or sometimes I might say the radio ads in the podcast space. And so from a purchase rate perspective, you see host-read ads about 30% better from a response rate perspective. From a CPA perspective, also a bit more efficient. So kind of showcasing why, or the power of podcasts. People love to listen because they love the host. And they love to hear what sort of recommendations or anything like that, like what are the opinions of the products from the host, and they really come off as personal endorsements. So you see how that's a very important aspect here. Now, if you flip the script a little bit, because there is a difference between, let's say, buying an audience or buying a run of show across all episodes versus a single episodic buy, which is typically a host-read ad. So you're going to see in here the purchase rate. These are the graphs on the right-hand side. The purchase rate for those that are targeted for a specific episode are twice as efficient from a purchase rate perspective versus those non-show specific buys, those producer-read ads. But when we look at a cost per acquired customer perspective, they're kind of equal. So you start to see, again, that invisible hand kind of guiding and steering the CPM pretty darn good. So that's host-read ads, show-specific ads, and producer-read ads. Let's talk about performance, about where should the ad be. So earlier in the episode, the better. Perhaps that's not a surprise. Early in the episode, the better. Generally speaking, when we're buying podcast ads, we are buying impressions, but really it's not an impression. It's a download, and that's sort of how the industry works. And so when we're taking a look at some of this information, because it's measured on downloads, someone may not make it to your ad. So you start to see that in the ad group 1, which is like the first ad group that shows up in the podcast itself. Some call that a pre-roll. The definition of a pre-roll is just a little bit wonky within the industry. So we go by ad group 1. You see that the purchase rate is most efficient at ad group 1. And the cost per acquired customer is most efficient on ad group 1 as well. And as you start to go to the right of that graph, you start to see some of those efficiencies drop. And so that's sort of the reason why we are buying impressions, but really it's a download behind the impression. Let's talk a little bit about ad length. This is the most surprising one. The longer the ad, the better the performance. Isn't it crazy? We keep talking about things like 6-second ads, and all of a sudden I'm on stage talking to you all about longer ads work better in podcasts. And the reason why, the confounding variable in here that shows that, is that typically it's a host-read episodic buy that has a 2-minute, 3-minute, 5-minute bit of content where the host is talking about their personal experiences with the product. And it's those that are seemingly driving this graph to show longer ads drive better performance. Optimal frequency. This is oftentimes a question that we get all the time. When you're at about a 5 frequency per month, you have results that are above benchmark. You start to stretch out a little bit more, maybe up to 15. It flattens out a little bit, stays pretty consistent. And you hit that 15 plus, you see how much it drops. So this will give you a really great sense of, from a frequency perspective, what makes sense for you as an advertiser. Incrementality. This is a very complex topic, and I probably don't have enough time to totally talk about it. But the concept here is, if I'm a large brand, I spend a lot of money across a lot of channels. When I start spending in podcasts, would those people I'm hitting in podcasts have purchased anyway? And that's what incrementality is designed to answer. So when we look at the difference between incrementality between podcasts and streaming audio, you start to see that incrementality drop a little bit as the size of the brand goes up, or in other words, those larger brands have more dollars competing across other channels for those customers. So you see that incrementality goes slightly down. For those of us looking for incrementality numbers, here's a great understanding of how that looks across the 2 different channels. Where are the buyers for both podcasts and streaming audio? They over-index on the top DMAs. If I saw the rest of this graph, if I showed it to you, all of those bars that are above the 0 would be below the 0. So this is a great way to find efficiently these audiences within these DMAs. Interestingly enough, although it looks like those bars go up together, they're actually not the same audience. So there's about 20% overlap between the podcast and the streaming audio audience today. And so when one is looking for, let's say, a high reach channel, they don't often think about digital ads in the audio space. If I were to buy both streaming and podcasts, I can hit upwards of 85% of the US population. So I'm not only driving great performance, I'm also driving great reach with this channel. And the quick key takeaways, there's a lot more within the benchmark report. I've got another QR code if you want to take a look and download it. But high level here, digital audio is an underutilized but high value performance channel. How you execute very much so matters, and our benchmark report is really helpful to kind of showcase that information. And digital audio is also scalable, so both performant and high reach. So with that, that is the state of audio and how to buy audio ads like a pro. If you'd like to, again, download that QR code, so that download the PPB, or benchmark report, QR code on the left. If you'd like to get in touch and have a conversation with us about how this might work for you, QR code on the right. And thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Good to see you all.